And I will introduce the first speaker. It's Sam Cater from BT. Again, I repeat for people who don't know BT because they know British Telecom, it's the same, almost, right? Sam brings a practitioner's view from outside the traditional CHERI research circle. At BT, he has taken CHERI from policy discussion to hands-on deployment, including real Morello-based network infrastructure. He's here to share what adoption looks like when theory meets telecom reality. So, welcome, Sam.
Take two. Good morning. My name's Sam Cater. I'm a researcher at BT Labs in Industrial Park, for anyone who knows that. It's about an hour just southeast of here. And I want to bring you a perspective of CHERI from an organization that has only been looking into it for about a year. So we've not got the 15 years of pedigree and experience that many of the people here in the room do have. And I want to share our journey coming from discovering what CHERI is to how you find your way around the CHERI ecosystem as a newcomer, and then tell you some of the work we're doing, where we've come from, where we're going, and things like that, to set a scene for today. So I'm leading BT's engagement with CHERI. It's me and two other researchers. The thread that I manage is known as Secure and Resilient Compute. It's part of our cloud infrastructure research project. My background isn't actually applied research. It's more in hardware deployment, customer deployment, 5 in the morning kit installations for customers, HSBC as an example, policy and practice, that type of thing. But I also used to do a lot of work around relationships with startups, evaluating their hardware capabilities, and then showcasing that novel capability to our customer base, top 100 in the UK, to try and get adoption, trials, evaluations, and testing. So not unfamiliar with the startup scene. I'm a BT accomplished engineer. We have our own technical fellowship in the business. Recently, CHERI Alliance ambassador, I'm pleased to say, and also an Innovate UK grant assessor, and have been for the last 5 years. So, though I can't assess on anything related to CHERI, because that would be a massive conflict of interest, what I can do is give tips, pointers, helpful insight to what someone on the other side of the computer screen finds helpful to see when evaluating such proposals. Okay, so what I'm going to talk over is why we're interested in CHERI. We all know CHERI is fantastic and wonderful, but we have specific business challenges that CHERI looks like it could address. I'll cover our work to date in the field, so how we came to understand the lie of the land, trial and error through evaluation of hardware, the ups and the downs, and then talking around a router demonstrator. BT is telecoms, telecoms has a lot of routers in it, so we wanted to see what we could do with the state of the art. And then moving forward. So where do we plan to go from here? So the big question, why the interest? Why is our logo on board? How have we come to be here? Well, very serendipitously, Dave Harcourt, who you would have heard speak yesterday, one peer of mine, is the Chief Security Authority for BT, and he used to sit on the Digital Security by Design panel, which ultimately helped steer CHERI in the direction it is today. So BT as a company has a long-standing history with CHERI, and we have various other parts of strong support in the organization. The MD of Research is a fan of CHERI, as are various security directors throughout the business. This year, Dave put a business challenge forward, which was to explore memory safety for the business in a very wide-reaching term that covers both software development and design, so memory-safe languages, to generally bolster our infrastructure and the software we make, but also to focus on other businesses that feed into our own, specifically in our supply chain, which brings us to use case number 1, the use of memory-safe hardware from third parties. We want to protect the control planes and administrative functions of all the routers and hardware in our estate, which is potentially subject to exploitation through the supply chain. That's use case number 1. Use case number 2 is, I'm sorry to say, far more business-oriented. We are a business. We like to be profitable and make money. And due to UK government priorities and strategy going forward and promotion of CHERI, we suspect that in the near future, we will have customers knocking on our door saying, we've heard about CHERI, We would like to get involved with it, to adopt it. How can we do so? And so by getting engaged at this stage, we're laying a foundation in the business for progression forward, at least being aware of it and able to have those conversations. Okay, use case number 1, our networking estate. We inherit vast volumes of risk, which is through absolutely no fault of our own. If your car has a software fault or a hardware fault, you return it to the dealer and they will replace or fix the component, usually free of charge. With network hardware, once it's in our estate, even if the vendor provides a patch, it is us that has to go to our own expense to discover the devices in the field, usually catalogued anyway, find out where they are, take them offline, cause service downtime, outage for the customers, risk breaching SLAs, and various other problems which frankly shouldn't have been our challenge in the first place. That is if you can even get hold of the patches in a timely manner from the vendor, and unfortunately a trend in the industry is to start putting those patches behind a paywall, which you have to pay extra for on top of what you already paid as part of the service contract. So there is a lot of expense involved here. Going into things like management, downtime, and remediation cost, the value to the business of this varies depending on who you ask and which way the wind is blowing, but it's in the tens of millions of pounds per year we expend on remediating threats in our estate. The word cloud to the right is an amalgamation of frequently occurring words in the CVEs that caused BT the greatest amount of, this is anecdotal, not statistical, headache, challenge, problems in the last year. And I think everyone in the room appreciates the words that are in that word cloud, so you can see how well CHERI specifically aligns to remediating this challenge our business and the wider industry faces. Obviously, it's not just us. There we go. So around a year ago, we asked ourselves the question, as CHERI newbies to the industry, the sort of things any business would ask when engaging with a new technology. What is the technology capable and not capable of doing today? Does it deliver on its promises? I've been in BT for 13 years now. I have seen many hype curves come and go relating to cybersecurity. What's the performance like compared to the state of the art? And most importantly, how can we make use of and commercialize such technology as soon as possible? And as a research program laid out for the year, this is where we started off. This is what we found. No CHERI-enabled telecoms hardware from vendors whatsoever. No telecoms organizations in the CHERI Alliance. We have now taken steps to fix that. We are curious as to why we are the only one year later. I know that this has been addressed heavily by organizations such as the Capable Hub and Andrew Murray's work, fragmented documentation, broken Git repos, pointers and links in documentation that don't go anywhere, and if you can get hold of the code, unstable builds which crash frequently and are unreliable. And then when it comes to, I'll talk more about this in a second, but talking with vendors, difficulty onboarding, difficulty getting the source code, getting it to compile, even with them holding our hands in the process. And then there's the ever familiar cyclical scenario. We want to buy it, nobody's making it, because we're not making enough noise, apparently, that we want it at scale to justify manufacture. This is what we found. So we pivoted from how can we use the technology to how can we instead support the technology and evangelize it and promote it going forwards. There's a number of ways we can do that. The most obvious choice is what I'm doing right now, which is public endorsement of CHERI. BT values and appreciates what CHERI is as an initiative and what it tries to do. We joined the Alliance last year, April 2025, so nearly our anniversary, and we align ourselves to NCSC and DCIP priorities as a business. That is something we are pleased and proud to do, which means all of the buzzwords on the screen, and protecting critical national infrastructure are a priority. Promotion wherever possible, this is an example of it, but the picture on the screen is, I can only describe it as a speakeasy. There's a bar in Manchester called the Northern Monk Refectory where Net Manchester host their mini conference every month. So a colleague of mine who runs this asked me to be a speaker. So I've done an underground bar talk on CHERI in Manchester, which is fantastic. All of them very interested. Their data center staff, their local startup employees, workers, delighted to hear and fascinated to hear what CHERI is all about. But then there's the big question. With a name and a brand of our magnitude here in the UK, rather than waiting for the industry to start doing something, can we be a catalyst? Can we lead by example and pull things ourselves? Let's see what we can build with the state of the art and see what it can do, what it can't do. So building a CHERI-enabled router, and I'm talking about routers in the context of high-end network hardware, not the sort of thing that powers your home broadband, but enterprise grade, you would think would be a relatively easy thing to do. If I go a few miles into town, I can go to the Raspberry Pi store, I can buy a Raspberry Pi at inflated costs with the RAM, and I can put some config on there and have it routing packets in a matter of minutes. It's not a challenge, so why should it be to do it with CHERI? There were a lot of challenges. Challenges we didn't expect, which is precisely why we undertake this type of evaluative work. We shopped around, we spoke to many vendors, some of whom are in this room, who offer CHERI in some form or another. In the end, like many others, we chose Morello for a couple of key reasons. One is the fantastic CHERI BSD operating system. We're very grateful for it. It is very relieving after having gone through various other stages of what I've called compile and hope on the slide. You get the code, you compile it, it runs for 2 to 3 hours, it fails, you try to fix something, you do it again for 2 to 3 hours, that's a whole day gone of time. If I have a CHERI BSD that has the packages waiting for me to download, that's a fantastic experience as ultimately a customer of the hardware or the service. We wanted to have an experience a bit like a router operating system, so folks are familiar with OpenWRT or pfSense. By using CHERI BSD, we're able to get that interactive command line experience. The hardware is extensible, of course, so we can shove a load of network cards in it because it's PCI Express, although it's worth noting, interestingly, that some PCI Express cards we used from particular vendors would cause the kernel to have a panic within moments. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of why that is, but presumably there's something memory unsafe going on, which is causing a fault in the hardware. But perhaps best of all, good, up-to-date documentation, which was reliable and robust, and I've underlined it, easily accessible, real-time and free support for us for CHERI BSD and Morello. The screenshot on the right is a conversation I had with Mark Johnston, who maintains a tool called PF. There was no packet firewall in CHERI BSD when we started doing this work. If you're doing a router, a firewall is a pretty significant piece of the software stack that you need to have working. It wasn't there. So we managed to get hold of Mark and say, what's going on? Can we have a packet firewall, please? And then there were a few things in the kernel that needed to be uplifted and patched. We found that IPv6 worked out the box, no problem. I'm a big IPv6 evangelist, so I've called it legacy IPv4 on the screen there. If we tried to do NAT, it crashed the box every single time. And I've got a video here of my laptop. I'm telling my laptop to use the CHERI Morello as its next hop gateway for passage to the internet. And every time, I know this video looping, every time, it would crash. So as a large vendor that would like to consume CHERI and is experimenting with it in this space, it's not particularly positive signs. But going back to the support, I was able to have a dialogue the same day with the CHERI BSD team, and they said, yes, we think we know what that is. That's in a pre-release of the kernel. We've patched that. If you just run these commands, which is what was on that previous Slack message, you'll get the kernel early, and the patches are in there. Apply it, see if it works. And it did. So we had IPv4 and IPv6 routing working on CHERI. If people are interested, there is the patch for PF from Mark. It's only 3 lines, which means that patching software to work with CHERI is really easy. But I'm aware that there were a lot of patches in the background in the kernel as well that facilitated this working, so it's not quite as easy as that. But again, for me as the consumer, that's what I saw. That was the patch, and it started working. So the router demonstrator today, I apologize for it being on the floor in the bottom of a server rack. There was no space in the server rack for it due to the form factor. So if anyone's watching and wants to make a router-esque device, please make it a standard rack mount width. It lives in our evaluation environment at Adastral Park today. It's been carrying real user traffic, and what I mean by that is researchers who work in what we call our end-to-end research platform are passing packets through it and have been since the 23rd of February, 300 gigs, not a lot, but then we're not passing Netflix through this. So it's 300 gigs of real valuable traffic or telemetry or data. We found that 1 gigabit per second uses about 25% CPU on the Morello, so we've got lots of room for growth and expansion or higher volume of traffic, those PCI Express slots I mentioned. And we're hoping to do some articles and press on bt.com in the coming months to further evangelize and catalyze what we're trying to bring to the table, which is that pull from distributors, vendors, to show that we're interested in this technology. It's been well received by stakeholders in the organization, but that then leads to the question of what next. And I will prepend this slide by saying the conversations I've had over the last day alone pretty much make this slide redundant. I've completely changed what I plan to do. One of the things we need to do as part of the demonstrator is demonstrate memory safety vulnerability mitigation. At the moment, it's not really doing that. It's just routing packets. So we need to orchestrate some kind of malicious attack, something running like an Nginx web server on the device. We then try and exploit it, observe how it's captured. Does it crash the box? Doesn't it? All those types of things. That's what we need to take the demonstrator to as a next level. As I mentioned, more ports, more traffic. I want to see how far we can push the box. I also want to do far more work with multiple VLANs and complicated firewall rules to stress test the CPU and see how it handles such rules and traffic. Exploring other vendors. Some of them, I mentioned earlier, weren't particularly fit for purpose at the time for this demonstrator, but things have come along by about 6 months. And I know that some of those vendors have now completely re-architected provided alternative software stacks for us to use, including full Linux versions so we can use on their hardware. So that's something we're excited to explore. There is a conference coming up internal to BT in the next few months, actually next month now, which has very senior attendance. So our CEO will be there, her reports, other CEOs who manage the business will be there, and it's about research showing what we're doing to the wider business and having conversations. CHERI has a stand there. It'll be a Heartbleed style demo, so nothing like a router, but we'll be having those conversations and stirring the pot at basically the most senior level in the business, not only to make them aware of the work that's going on, but to hope when they go and socialize with their peers, the other ISPs in the industry, they'll take word of CHERI forward. Something we need to understand commercially is what do you do with a router when it has a memory safety fault? Depends on the assurance level of the customer. Do you go full belt and braces, shut down and say, because we had a fault, that could be a malicious attempted exploitation, therefore let's pull up the drawbridge? Or if communication and throughput is more important, how do you alert on it? What message do you send to a security operations center to say something has happened? Because if you say buffer overflow in this component, they won't know what that means. So how do you inform security operations team to handle alerts that may come from a CHERI service? That's a conversation to have. And in turn, I personally want to understand compartmentalization more thoroughly to understand how software can be broken down and isolated such that if one part fails, the whole doesn't. Commercialization, the CHERI Research Center have kindly offered to speak to managing directors of research and present a commercialization story in the coming weeks. And what I'd like to leave you with, because I have 1 minute left, is to stress very sincerely how open we are to collaboration. Any ISPs watching, any hardware vendors watching who operate as or distributors who can put pressure on the manufacturers to start investigating CHERI more sincerely, we are very open to discussions. We would like to have those discussions to pull the ecosystem forward. And with that, I have some time for questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Sam. Any question? Okay.
So In terms of the hardware and the documentation, and I'm more interested for the moment in the microcontroller space, I think. Have you observed improvements in the year or so that you've been looking? And what do you think needs to happen?
So, I think trying to think how to word this nicely. The documentation I was referring to around it being problematic was, in some regards, the documentation went too far and was covering very deep technical avenues, which at the layer we were operating at wasn't particularly relevant. We wanted to know simply how to get things working, and the documentation was around how individual little components on the board were carrying out. So we didn't need that. So we had to do the wheat through the chaff to get hold of anything useful. And even if we got hold of the useful stuff, often it was outdated and didn't work properly. The work that groups like the Capable Hub are doing is very valuable in centralizing a repository for general tutorials and examples for CHERI. But the vendors in question, who I won't name obviously, that we will be revisiting them to essentially understand how far they've come in the last 6 to 8 months or so. Have I seen improvement in the documentation? No, because I haven't gone to look because we settled on Morello, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I can say the documentation on the microcontroller side is tolerably barely usable, but rather interestingly, the dev containers will not build on an ARM PC, which is a problem if you're a big vendor of ARM PCs and give them to all of your developer staff. So that's, you know, from another experience, we're looking and it's quite challenging.
Glad it's not just us. Mike?
Just one question from online. We have, do you have any ongoing work on Chariot?
We don't have any ongoing work on Chariot. Not that we're not interested in it. We have got some use cases. Thinking whether I should share them publicly. No, I won't share them publicly. We have some use cases for embedded systems for CHERI in our estate, more along the high assurance side of things. But we haven't approached that yet, since it's only one man and 2 graduates. We've been working on this, along with the other work we do. CHERI is but one angle of the work we do in our team. So we haven't used Chariot. We will be considering Chariot and other embedded devices for some use cases we have that I would like to engage in this financial year. Essentially, the way BT works is we decide our research plan April to June, and then we carry it on throughout the year. So hopefully something nailed down by June in regard to that. Cool. There's no more questions.
Maybe one more question.
Oh,
here.
So presumably your vendors, like Cisco or whatever, will be running on x86 or their own custom thing.
yeah.
Even if you decide CHERI is the correct way to go, how do you then push that back so that people making the routers without like competing with the router space?
It's a very challenging question. So the high-end routers do tend to use x86 hardware just from the throughput, but you don't. One of the things that we need to work on, I think, is re-architecting how routers themselves are built. So you don't need a high-end CPU for governing the administrative panel or the command line interface and the software that sends the instructions to the chips that actually do the routing and switching. You don't need that. So can you get into a sort of hybrid world in the near future where the heavy lifting is still done by x86, but the portal that governs all of that infrastructure is guarded by CHERI, RISC-V, or an ARM equivalent or something else? So the dream would be to go to a vendor and say, oh, you sell us thousands of this model. Can you just do an edition that you just rip the heart out and put CHERI in? That's the dream. It's not realistic or pragmatic. Could you compartmentalize? Could you segment the hardware such that some functions are carried out by a classical CPU, x86 CPU, and others are carried out by ARM? I don't think is an unreasonable thing to consider, especially for high assurance customers. And that's one of the ways I think this needs to be driven, is high assurance customers with a lot of money behind them start stipulating on bids, request to tender, and so on, that memory safety as a component of an infrastructure or architecture will be favored. You watch the account managers jump when they see that. And that's one of the things I think will catalyze the industry even further.
Okay, thank you very much. And, yeah.